Good evening and welcome to the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive and also be accessed via the live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including public comments on cases. This time, will you please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Beal, will you please call roll?
Ms. Harder. Present. Mr. Shanak.
Here.
Mr. Fishman.
Here.
Mr. Way.
Here.
Mr.
Here.
Here.
Snayer.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. At this time, I will entertain a motion to accept tonight's documents into the record. Do I have the documents, the agenda? No minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalak. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Snayer.
Yes.
Ms. Call.
Yes.
Mr. Supalak.
Yes.
Mr. Way.
Yes.
Mr. Fishman.
Yes.
Mr. Shanak.
Yes.
Ms. Harder. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council receives a recommendation from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. Anyone who intends to address the Commission on any of these administrative cases must be sworn in. Tonight, there are two cases eligible for the consent agenda. Those are cases 3 and 4, Valentina's Outdoor Speakers and Valentina's Windscreen, located at 4595 Bridge Park Avenue, cases 22-168CU and 23-001WR. Does anyone wish to remove these cases from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalak. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Schneer. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Fishman.
Yes.
Mr. Shanak.
Yes.
Ms. Harder. Yes. Mr. Supalak.
Yes.
Mr. Snayer.
Yes.
Ms. Call.
Yes.
Mr. Way.
Yes.
Thank you to those who are here from Valentina's. We look forward to the progression of the restaurant. Anyone intending to address the Commission on any cases this evening, will you please stand, raise your right hand, and answer in the affirmative? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to the Commission? Thank you. All right. We will move on to cases 1 and 2. Avondale Woods, Section 2 at 5215 Avery Road, 22-026 FDP. Will we be hearing cases 1 and 2 together? Mr. Henschel, will we be hearing cases 1 and 2 together? This application is a request for a review and approval of a final development plan for development and construction of Avondale Woods, Section 2, consisting of 27 single-family lots and 2 reserves. The approximately 9-acre site is zoned planned unit development, Avondale Woods, and located north of the intersection of Langley Drive and Scarlett Drive. This case will be heard with Avondale Woods, Section 2 at 5215 Avery Road, 22-027 final plat. This application is a request for a review and approval of a final plat for the same site mentioned in the previous item. It looks like Ms. Fields, you will be conducting our presentation. I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm glad to be back with you all. So for this project, Avondale Woods, this is Section 2 of Subarea C. This project started back in 2014 with the preliminary development plan, and then now we're at the final development plan and final plat for just this Section 2 in Subarea C. Here is the site area outlined in yellow. It's kind of in the back corner of the site. And you can see the kind of what's been developed at this point. Oops. Here's the pictures of the site area. Obviously, it's a undeveloped land. You can see the trees in the background. Some of those are in the tree preservation area or out of the site. And that we'll kind of cover in a little bit. Just to kind of recap that history. So again, the original PUD was approved in 2014. It was a total of 120 acres rezoned to PUD, includes 360 dwelling units, and that is single and multifamily, and 37 acres of park space. And then in 2016, the final plat and final development plan for 3 of these sections was approved. And those are what have been approved to date, and then before you tonight. So here's how section 2 kind of fits in with the overall development plan. You can see that nope, that doesn't work. That it's the continuation of Langley Drive and Scarlet Drive, which are the kind of the north, and then the one that curves up. And then I always forget the name of this road. Tansy Close is the main drive that cuts horizontally through this area. And for you tonight, we do have the final development plan and the final plat for this section. So this section is about 9 acres in size. There's 27 single family lots. It's just under 3 dwelling units per acre in density. There are 3 open space reserves. One is in the bulb of the little curved street. On the left-hand side of it, there's also a small area on the far left side that goes north and south. That's part of the reserve area. And then between lots 33 and 32, there's another area, and that is where there's a connection for the bike path coming through between those lots 32 and 33. In terms of development standards, as part of this request, the applicant is requesting that lot 25 of this section. The development standards for this Avondale Woods PUD requires a 65-foot buildable depth. We have 1 lot in this section that they're proposing a 60-foot developable building area, and that is due to an easement width at the front of their lot. We have another note in here. We're in discussions with the applicant if there may be some lots in the earlier sections that also may need a reduction in that buildable area, but that hasn't been confirmed. So we were discussing it earlier today, but that's not going to be part of tonight's discussion. And if it's determined at a later date that that is the case, that'll be brought back before you. For the mailboxes, there's proposals for a cluster mailbox unit right at the kind of the edge of Langley Drive where that star is. As part of our conditions of approval, we are asking the applicant to continue to discuss with staff what those mailboxes will look like and those final designs, but that's the location of the proposed mailboxes. From a tree preservation and landscape plan standpoint, 13 trees were identified in this section. Those were also identified as dead trees. There's also a 20-foot tree preservation zone in the rear lots of the properties that are on the north side of that Tansy Close Drive. And then also there's 51 street trees planned for this sub area. And this will be a continuation of the street design for the other sections that have already been approved. For the final plat, this is the final plat. It is substantially in conformance with the preliminary development plan in terms of number of lots and size of lots. There's 27 lots proposed in this section, so this gives you a better view of those lots themselves and their buildable area. In terms of the final development plan criteria, all the conditions were either met or met with text modifications. And then same with the final plat criteria. So all of those requirements have either been met or met with conditions. And that brings us to our recommendations. Again, we were proposing to add the addition of those lots 6, 7, 8, and 9, but we are going to pull that back off and confirm that before we bring that in front of you. But we are requesting or recommending approval of a text modification to reduce the buildable lot for just lot 25 to 60 feet. And then for the final development plan, we have the conditions as follows. The proposed change we had Condition 4 was regarding the 30-foot telephone easement. The applicant has provided us information that that easement was vacated a few years ago, and they are going to provide us documentation of that easement being vacated with the recorded documents. And so once they provide us with those recorded documents that shows that easement has been vacated, then that condition will no longer be needed and the easement will come off the plat. And so that's no longer a consideration or a concern for us, but the other conditions still remain. And then for the final plat, this will also has 2 conditions that we are recommending. The plat for the final development plan and the text modifications, those are Planning and Zoning Commission's final approval is here tonight. For the plat, that is a recommendation to City Council per these recommended conditions is our request. So if you have any questions, let me know.
And for this item, we'll handle questions for both staff and the applicant together. Is the applicant here? It looks like Homewood. Would you like to make a statement or have a presentation for us this evening?
My name is Linda Maneri. Good evening. I see some familiar faces and some new ones on Planning Commission. I'm with EMH&T Planner. This has been a legacy project for me.
Could I have you state your address for the record?
5500 New Albany Road, Columbus. I remember when we started with conservation design on this. Warren, you were part of that. It's been around a while. It was started before we had an overpass and a 4-lane intersection at Avery. Homewood is interested in really just continuing to move this forward. You know, you are familiar with the housing demands that are happening, and this section is something we need to continue to move forward. We have worked through the recommendations, and I think we're really good with everything. I just want to take a minute again to talk. We mentioned the lot 25, but I think you guys didn't understand 25, 6, 7, 8, 9 all have a limitation on the depth. Okay. And the reason being is we moved through the engineering of this whole plan. When we first started, that huge easement that came through there, that was that combined storm and sanitary, wasn't surveyed in as much detail as it is today. If you look at the plan, it takes a weird angle. Okay. And so the front of the lot and where this easement are, it's got a funny angle. So what it does is it has an impact on a few of those lots. The same thing, there's a preservation zone that's on the back of that particular area. When we initially started this, we had a survey of just the edge of the tree line. We've gone back in through consecutive engineering proposals that we've had and identified trees. In this particular area, along lots 25, 6, 7, 8, 9, the same thing with that weird angle, the tree row is up a little bit further. So in actuality, that 20-foot preservation zone doesn't really have any trees in it on those lots, but because of the way the text was written, that zone's there. We understand we've got a few tree canopies in there, critical root zone, but the 20-foot basically on the back of those lots doesn't really have much in terms of, you know, existing trees. The other thing that happens is there's a drainage easement that can't be inside of that. We had talked a little bit with engineering staff about that and said, well, could we push a part of that easement, you know, keep the storm pipe out of that 20-foot easement? Could we have an overlap? And, you know, I think we were told no. So you add all those impacts on the back, you add the impacts on the front, the angle, and you end up with this 60 that kind of grows up to, we're almost at 65 on the west end of that lot 29. So the lots that are really impacted are 25, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I'm sorry you guys didn't understand that I was trying to explain that. So that particular recommendation we would like that modified. We can update that in the text. Homewood has, they plan for the biggest product. Everybody we work for wants to plan for the biggest product depth, but they have other product that fits those 5 lots that can easily accommodate a nice size home on those. So I wanted to make that comment. And then the other thing on the cluster mailbox, we do have a box installed at Lakeside, which is the duplex side. When you come in, you've got the NCR product on the right, the Lakeside product on, NCR's on the left, Lakeside's on the right. That particular box we have installed there already. It's tan colored. It's been approved by the Postal Service. We're proposing that same thing. We can work through that with staff and the rest of these things as well. So I just wanted to make sure I brought that up. We started talking about it and then we flipped around. So that's it in terms of at least presentation. We are open for questions. Tom Tolbert's here. He's with Homewood. Kyle Shreves is an engineer at EMH&T, so he's been working on the engineering plans for this.
Thank
Open
you.
for questions.
Thank you. So we will handle questions together before we get started with the change of 1 of 27 to have the reduction instead of that 5 of 27. Does staff still have the same recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. All
And
right, looking to the commission for questions. Mr. Fishman.
Questions. By the way, the mailboxes are there delivered already. They were there 2 hours ago. They look just like the other ones. They're fine.
Yes.
They were sitting there. Can we see where those mailboxes are getting installed again?
Do you know the location of the CBU?
There's-
What lot it's on?
There's 2 pedestal ones sitting on the ground. One's 12, one's 16. What's right there? It's kind. You know better than I do, but it's right on the main drag, which means people are going to have to stop there to get their mail.
Maybe the walk. Let's
Well,
hope. I mean,
people don't usually. They usually. I wonder, is the location something you're in love with, or?
well, it actually, Homewood has some documentation. They sent a plan with all the planned locations to the postmaster back in a few years ago. And they generally approved of all the locations. If everybody has issue with that, it's not a problem for us. We can find another spot for it if
Well,
commission is
it's up to
uncomfortable
you.
with that, so.
It's something that isn't a killer for me. When I was there and then I saw the boxes, they're
little
standard nice spot. They're laying on the ground there. But I thought, boy, if they put them right there, as people come in, people have a tendency to fly out that's the entrance. And I thought maybe.
We can work with staff on that. I don't think,
That's just a suggestion.
Yep.
Believe me, it's not a problem. The other thing I wanted to ask staff, that the giant woods, this thing butts through, that is all reserve, is that what you're saying? The heavily wooded area that's kind of behind?
Yeah, let me bring you up a better version of view of that.
Yeah, the woods.
So here you can see the site itself, and then this whole area behind it is currently wooded.
Is that going
and-
to stay? Is that reserve?
yes. It's, that was the whole premise of the plan right from the get-go.
Great.
Uh, Does the applicant own that parcel? Is that?
I can't remember if we transferred that in one of the, transferred it. Okay.
Great.
Can staff confirm?
You could probably click
through
on the
the-
auditors real quick. It probably got transferred with one of the first phases, I would guess.
Okay.
Just
First
don't-
what?
One of the first phases, it probably got transferred. I
So-
think Zach's
great.
gonna hop on
Yeah.
auditor.
While we're confirming that, let's go Ms. Harder.
I just had a couple questions about the mailboxes. I went over there and I didn't see them on the ground, but I had a couple of questions. If you go online, you can see some different types of mailboxes. They may have a cap, a little bit more interesting that way, seeing if that would be something that you all be interested in and the color change and so forth. But also I was thinking about, the second part of this is not everybody, I see the walkability to the mailboxes working just fine, but if I want to drive up and get my mail because it's raining or I've got the kids in the car or something like that, it doesn't seem accessible to do that. If you had like some kind of a moving in or somewhere to kind of park your car to the side so you could go get that easily. And then the third part of it is I think about anyone who has a handicap. You have two of them that are facing each other, and I'm not sure you could, if you were in a wheelchair, could turn that around. You'd have to go up and then backwards. Just thinking about the accessibility to that.
So Interestingly enough, the Postal Service doesn't require a ADA ramp to it from the street in their standards. That's really interesting. So we try to get them located closer to intersections for that reason. I don't recall if this one is on the side of the road that we can park. We have probably water on one side, sanitary on the other. We could look at that to see. We generally don't create pull-offs, so if there is on-street parking on that side and we think we need to flip it, I think we are more than open to that. Color change and cap, are you thinking you want a different color from what's already out there, or?
I can help with that.
Oh,
That-
I'm
that-
sorry.
I think that's the approved U.S. Post Office box.
There are
There-
about 4 different colors
different
that you
colors.
can choose from. And it seemed like you had not chosen that yet until tonight that I was reading.
Now,
But
now just calling out that there is a condition number 2, work with staff to finalize the location and color of the cluster mailbox. So are you uncomfortable with delegating that to
no, I think
staff?
that's just fine. Is that would they entertain the idea of like a cap? There's several different kind of opportunities you can add to it just to make it look a little
make
bit
it more
more
decorative?
decorative.
Yeah, I think
yes.
Tom
Thank
is
you.
nodding his head yes. He would be agreeable to that. The color, like I said, that's the color. If you look, well, you have your iPads there. It's that tan color. You know, there's 2 thoughts. Do you do the tan and it hopefully kind of goes away, or do you do a darker color? We've done them in black. We've done them in bronze. We've done them in tan. It's just more owner directive. So again, I think we'd like to keep that color because that's what we already have. But I can also see we've got Lakeside, which is a little different product. And if we wanted to move to the single family portion, which is, although this already is, that's right, on the first section, this is already there. So we would probably like to stick with the tan color.
Would the applicant be willing to add design in the current condition? The applicant work with staff to finalize the location, color, and design of the cluster mailbox?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, other questions from Mr. Way?
So if you could pull up the site plan, oops, over at the, so north of lot 27, there's some lines that go into the woods, and it looks like on one of the, it's labeled C. Do you know?
Oh,
It's the double dashed lines north of.
That's the easement.
So there's two. One is the AT&T, which is
That's, okay.
that's gone. And
Wait.
then the other, well, is that the one you're talking about there?
No,
Lot
lot
27.
27.
So if we could go back to the previous, that illustrated, there we go.
See the double dashed lines in lot 27?
The other
There's a
one is-
document here that has another line in the middle with a C on it, and it just comes into lot 27 and stops. And there's a utility easement between 26 and 25. I'm just trying to figure out is that anything, or is it?
That's a AT&T communication line. That's the easement that you see on that drawing. It comes down to 27, and then it turns to the east and then goes around.
Yeah.
I apologize. Could I have you state your name and address for the record, please?
Kyle Shreves, 555 or 5500 New Albany Road, Columbus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Supalack, did you have a question?
Nope.
Any other questions? Mr. Chinook?
A very quick clarification question. So the 60-foot depth, you're saying that's equally across all of them? You're not changing the,
It is not equal. It's less on the right side, starting at 20, help me out here, Carl, 25, and it gets deeper as you move
to
west. So
29. So you're not but you're still requesting the 60.
we're still going to
foot.
say minimum, because otherwise we'd have to go in and say 25 is this, 26 is this, 27.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was asking. Thank you.
Just clarification for staff on that same issue. We are not changing the depth of the lots. The lots maintain their 155 depth across that area. We're talking only the buildable area. So essentially those lots will have just as much open space as their surrounding parcels.
Correct.
But
Arguably more.
thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Supalack.
the only thing that changes is the buildable area length from 65 to 60.
And those range about a quarter acre, if I remember correctly.
No build zone.
Is that correct?
Yeah, 0.267, 0.2, yeah, most of them are about quarter acre.
Thank you. Other questions for staff or the applicant?
Yeah. That's right.
Ms. Harder.
Yeah, may I ask the staff about the traffic study? The reason why I'm just bringing that up, we talked about that at one point. I'm sorry. I just had a question. The study seemed to be done in 2021, and maybe at that point we were projecting maybe people were working at home more. And so did you take that to account? People maybe not going at certain times because they were already working at home, and do you see that increasing?
Are you asking about a traffic study related to this development?
Yes.
So there was back when this development was created, there was a agreement between the city and the developer about, and also Columbus, about improvements to the intersection of, I believe it's Avery Road, and then the entrance into the site, which I'll pull up here. So it's actually just above the O here on the National Church residence. So there was that, and then just south of there. So there were considerations as this development continued to unfold that the developer would be on the hook for providing specific money amounts based on the different sections. So part of this development and part of this section was kind of renegotiating that agreement because Columbus has changed their vision since probably 10, 12 years ago. This was originally supposed to be a lighted intersection. They're now contemplating that this is going to be a roundabout. So they still have to provide the funding for, there's a specific set amount that's outlined in that development agreement that they have to provide as this continues to phase out. Regarding specific traffic study, it would be very similar, if not the same, as to what they provided with the preliminary development plan. I don't believe they provided a traffic study specific for this section. Linda, if you could maybe clarify on that.
When we were looking at 2 and 3 combined, we actually ran all the numbers for you, and the way the traffic studies work, and I'm not a traffic engineer, I'll say that right from the get-go, but there's a manual, an ITE manual that gives them counts. I don't believe that manual has been updated at all based on traffic changes and such for COVID. So the numbers are probably actually higher than what we would see today with people, monitoring their schedules, some working at home in the morning or in the evening, or all the time at home or all the time at work. Unfortunately, there isn't really anything that our traffic guys can take from that manual and adjust for that. It is what it is. It's the accepted professional document that they use. So.
And what I would add to that is the number of single family lots you see here now is the same as what was shown previously. So nothing would have changed between now and then.
Thank you, Mr. Hounshell. Any final questions?
I just have a comment.
We do have deliberation next, so.
This is just, okay. It's concerning the no-build zone, and this has nothing to do with you really, except that in the years I've been around, if you drive the older subdivisions with no-build zone, that's where the shed goes and the permanent swing set goes and everything. I wonder if there's some way when you sell the lots, the builder sells the lots, that there could be something written on there that is a no-build zone, not to be built on, because these being, smaller lots, they have more of a tendency that people want the shed as far from their house as possible. And so those no-build zones get built on. So it's something that affects.
No, and I think Kyle could speak to that or confirm. It is on the plat as a tree protection zone, and there's language on there. So
yeah, if maybe they
and
make it in big print or something.
Is that carried over to the deed?
No, because when I went out there today, the lots are fairly shallow. They're supposed to be, but I just thought as a favor, maybe you could do something, because if you drive some of the older subdivisions, that's where, the shed's there in the no-build zone, And
The plot plans show the same. The plot plans that go in with the building permit, they do show it.
and you might 2 seconds about your deed restrictions.
Yeah, so our deed restrictions don't.
And again, if I could have you state your name.
Homewood Corporation, 2700 East Dublin Granville Road. Our deed restrictions do not permit sheds, so we won't be having sheds in that area. And also on our plot and grading plans that are sent out and approved by City of Dublin for building permits, it'll say on there as well. And it'll be also included on the plat.
yeah, I'm concerned about the resident, not you or.
Well, they get that when in their closing documents. That's one of the things that supposedly we're all supposed to be looking at when we is on a home.
Thank
And
you.
Warren, if you see any sheds, just
In your subdivision?
All the same.
Well, I just thought about that when it was there today, and I thought, it's pretty dense anyway, and I can imagine that no build zone is, would be.
Thank you. Any final questions for either staff or the applicant on these two items? Seeing none, we'll enter into deliberation. Does anyone wish to make comment on these two applications? I just have one quick one. In the mailbox placement, we are delegating that to staff. If you wouldn't mind, would you be willing to do a little bit of research with whomever that needs to be, whether that's the Postmaster General or whomever, to determine if they have numbers on the percentage of people who pick up their mail going to their home versus coming from their home? It would be nice to orient that where most of the traffic is going. If the neighborhood's anything like my neighborhood, people pick it up when they're coming home and therefore it's on the wrong side. We wouldn't want people crossing over traffic lanes, introducing a safety hazard. All right, any final discussion? So I will entertain 3 motions on these 2 items. The first being to approve the text modification with the reduced being buildable areas for lots 25 through 29 to 60 feet. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Who is the second? Mr. Fishman, thank you for the second. Ms. Beal.
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Ms. Call. Yes. Mr. Schneier,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Shinnock,
Yes.
Ms. Harder.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Second motion to approve the final development plan with 6 conditions.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Ms. Beal?
Ms. Harder,
Yes.
Mr. Shinnock,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Schneier,
Yes.
And finally, to approve the final plat with 2 conditions.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Shinnock,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Schneier,
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Way,
Yes.
And I apologize. I think you're going where I'm going. We neglected to consider public comment before taking action.
Right. So we'll let Ms. Beal get through the roll call and then we can address that.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms.
Ms.
Beal.
Harder.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing as I am neglectful this evening and was a little shotgun in that, do we have anyone from the public who would like to make comment on this case, or have we received any virtual public comment as we've been progressing through the meeting? Mr. Hounshell.
We have not.
Thank you.
I just have one clarification. You approved the planning recommendation for lots 26, 7, 8, 9 in the first part. In the second approval of the final development plan, that number 3 also has lot 25. Can we cover 6, 26, 27, 8, 29 in that? I should have probably stood up, but
Yeah.
I know I'm not supposed to, so.
That one we didn't specifically call out. So Mr. Boggs, I defer to you as we'd already passed the 25 through 29 in modification number 1, as I did not read off what the conditions were, rather that there were a count of conditions.
When you voted or made your motion with reference to the text that is displayed, had that -29 been inserted into the FDP approval as well?
No, it was just inserted in the first line for the text modification. I just put in that under 3, the -29. So that was not included when they did their vote.
Okay. My suggestion then would be by way of, if the commission's desire is to include that as the applicant has requested, then I would suggest a motion to reconsider that vote on that motion to reconsider, and then move to adopt with the revised set of 6 conditions.
Okay. Prior to doing that, one final call for public comment. If anyone would like to make public comment, and again, I apologize for being neglectful. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to reconsider the final development plan with 6 conditions with the modification of item 3 from inclusion of just lot 25 to lots 25 through 29.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Ms. Harder,
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Sneer,
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. And thank you, Mr. Boggs.
So do we need a second?
Now there will be a second motion to approve the final development plan with the 6 conditions as are now noted on your screens.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supalack. Do I have a second?
Second.
Almost.
Oh,
I swear our timing has been reduced on the microphones this meeting. All right, Ms. Beal?
Mr. Sneer,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Harder,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Way.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Thank you to everyone in the audience. And we look forward to seeing the development of this next phase. And thank you for bringing more housing choices to the city of Dublin. All right, the next item on our agenda is a legal refresher. So Mr. Boggs, we certainly appreciate your time this evening as always, and we will turn time over to you.
I have a whopping, I think, 8 slides or 9 slides of just a few topics to cover with everyone this evening that Mr. Hounshell is kindly pulling up. We've been talking for a while about doing a little bit of a refresher training, not fully the deep dive in terms of, open meetings, public records, et cetera, but just a few discrete topics that have accumulated through the year. I think that the last time we had a formal training might have even been last April when we all were here for a joint session of training or new member training. And so we thought it would just be a good time to revisit that. All right. So just to kind of orient things, why are we doing this in the first place? Why do we want you to be trained? Well, the fact of the matter is that these are legal proceedings affecting people's property rights and affecting the built environment of our community. And so we want you to be in a position, knowledge is power, and we want you to be in a position where the commission is the entity that is making the decisions it should be making and not a court in the event of an administrative appeal. So just to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to cover over the next few minutes, the list in front of you, starting with ex parte communications, I can't help but cover that. That one I always cover. And then moving on to planning and zoning in context, sort of what is the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission in relation to some of the other comments that we hear from applicants or from members of the public who may not be as familiar with the processes and powers and limitations of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The next one, application process and context. That was my way of trying to sum up where everything that you do here fits in that whole sequence of development from the time that somebody first starts putting crayons on paper, as our chair would say, to the point at which they are putting shovels in the ground. And then lastly, just a couple of pointers on your communications from the dais, because in many of our applications that we hear, they are subject to administrative appeal. And if they go that route, they end up as kind of lifeless words on a page. And that is what we have to work with to defend your decisions. And so we want to just remind you to be thoughtful about those items as you consider applications. So on my very wordy slide here, we're going to go briefly over ex parte communications. Just a reminder of what those are. When we are dealing with an administrative action, and that is any action where you are applying law that is already made to a discrete set of circumstances in an application before you. It is an ex parte communication for a member of this commission to have a substantive discussion about that application with an applicant, a representative of the applicant, or any other interested party, neighboring property owner, somebody like that who has an interest in that application. So those are things like the final development plan approval that you just went through this evening, amended final development plan approvals, conditional uses, which come up from time to time, and the Bridge Street District. Everything in the Bridge Street District is an administrative action because even though we use the terminology of concept plan, preliminary development plan, and final development plan that you see in the Plan District chapter as well, the Bridge Street District and all the neighborhoods within it are straight zoning districts. They are not creating a new code when they come with their preliminary development plan. They are just creating, a finer iteration of an earlier administrative application. The question, so, I include it anytime I talk to you about legal training. I have for the, 5 or 6 years now that I've been working with Planning and Zoning Commission here. Why do I do that? Well, because the Planning and Zoning Commission in these administrative applications acts as a mini tribunal. And so to defend the decisions that you make, we have to be sure that the decisions are based upon evidence that is submitted into the record at the public meeting, whether that be your packet materials. When you move to accept all of those documents, that is an evidentiary action to get those on the official record of the proceeding. When we have people sworn in at the beginning of the meeting, that is so that their testimony can be relied upon in an administrative appeal. And while we have people get up and provide comment, provide their name and address so that we can assess what their interest is if we get to an ultimate administrative appeal. So if we have an ex parte communication, then that opens the door to an argument from somebody that the decision that a commissioner has made is not based upon a fair consideration of the evidence that's in the public record. So my last bullet point here is, how do we avoid that? Well, ideally, we avoid it from the outset, right? And that's by being conscious and really trying to understand the nature of a particular application that is coming up on the agenda. Is it a rezoning? Well, then I'm acting in a legislative capacity, so I can talk to interested residents or anybody else who has an opinion on it, and I can take it or leave it. But if it is an administrative action and somebody approaches me in the grocery store, somebody, this is not a small town, but it has a small town environment. People know that you're on the commission and want to help you out. And so they may, approach you out and about or ask you questions, or you may have questions. So my first piece of advice to you would be try to lean on staff for those questions leading up to a meeting, because staff can work with an applicant to make sure that the information that you need is in front of you at the public meeting. Staff can help you work through those issues and be sure that any questions that have come up, they bring forward so that it's on the record at the public meeting. But if it does occur inadvertently, and it happens, then it's incumbent upon you as a commission member to make sure that that becomes part of the record so that it's there from an evidentiary perspective on appeal, and so that anybody who is on, whether that be an applicant, whether that be an interested party who is opposed to an application, so that they have the opportunity to respond to whatever has been communicated. And then we have a full open record in front of the commission for its decision. So are there any questions on this topic? Mr. Fishman?
Warren, could you, microphone?
I always thought that when a case is pending, you're not allowed to talk to the applicant.
That's right.
Okay. So
That's right. That's our first line of defense. But our second line is if we have an inadvertent communication, then we need to acknowledge it and get it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Next, so the next few slides are this series of planning and zoning in context. And our first subtopic here is project economics. So what do I mean by that? These are things that affect the bottom line of the applicant, but that aren't germane to the criteria for your decision. So we hear very frequently things like, it is too expensive for me to do X that you are asking me to do, or I need to have conditional use Y because it is going to make this, the hottest location in the region for my business. Those things all may be true, but none of them are germane to really any of the applications that you will tend to see. If a requirement in a zoning text is so onerous that a person cannot comply with it economically, then their safety valve for that is to go, start with their council member, try to initiate an application to have that text amended, ultimately by council. That has a wider range of criteria, but your run-of-the-mill final development plan, your Bridge Street District type applications, project economics, as you know and often remind applicants and others, are not a germane consideration.
Mr. Boggs?
Yeah.
Could you provide, because I know you have a wealth of them, some recent examples where this particular item would have come up, just as a general, not specific to any application, but where it may come up?
Well, we often get it in, it can come up in plan unit development applications, people seeking to have a preliminary development plan and development text approved, perhaps with a level of material that are not up to what the quality that the Dublin Code would point toward, and saying that it makes their housing models uneconomical, or perhaps asking for larger lot coverages or decreased setbacks so that they can put more square footage on a lot, and of course get their returns to be higher. That is their prerogative. It's their money, but it's also not germane to the planning and land use considerations that you're looking at in your criteria for plan district preliminary development plan approval, for example.
And again, could you stress the recourse? So we have a couple of different items there. The recourse if a material is too costly, or if they want to overbuild on an individual or many parcels, or if they want to change the product type. Could you talk through the different avenues that an applicant would have in each of those cases?
Well, it depends on what type of, what stage of their particular project they're in. But ultimately, if it's something that needs a code change, their recourse is to go through council to get council invested in that code change. And typically they'll refer it to a committee of council to discuss it. And then that committee of council might refer it back to you to work on it. But in the first instance, it is not a criteria for your decision that X, Y, or Z is necessarily too costly. So some of the other, and there are other examples. I shouldn't just pick on materials, but some of those are up on the slide as well. We often get the comments of, don't we already have too many, restaurants? Don't we already have too many hospitals? Don't we already have too many of this or that? Well, if it is contemplated in either the zoning as a permitted use, or if they're seeking some kind of rezoning and it's in the future land use plan as a use that is targeted, that's what we go with. Whether the market is saturated, whether this business is going to fail, is ultimately not a zoning consideration. It's an economic consideration for that applicant. So, and the other one that we sometimes will get is, owner occupied versus rental, which is fundamentally an economic consideration of a particular project. But in terms of land use, we are talking about, usually this comes up in the context of a multifamily development. Are the units in here going to be condos, or are they going to be apartments? Well, their use characteristics are going to be very much the same. People come and go to work, people come and go to eat, they have visitors, whether they are renting or own. Some people might say that, well, owner-occupied products are going to have more upkeep, more care. That is a property maintenance enforcement issue and not a zoning issue, because we have the same standard of property maintenance whether a property is owner-occupied or rented.
One additional item for clarification. Can you speak some to if something is administrative and the commission elects to downgrade whatever that is, perceived value of materials or anything, what precedent or what risk that poses for future properties?
So, for example, let's say, I just want to make sure I understand your question. Somebody comes with a final development plan and their development text says you have to use stone. And they say, my goodness, the market for stone is out of this world. Instead, we are going to use stucco. And Planning and Zoning Commission says, okay, we'll approve that. So there's a couple of risks that come up. The first risk is that somebody, their neighbor who has used stone has made their investment based on a certain expectation of how their surrounding properties are going to develop under the development text. In all likelihood, would have standing to appeal that decision, and we go through court and we brief it and it gets reversed. That is a hassle, but not ultimately a big deal. The other risk that you may have is on a completely unrelated application in a different part of town. Somebody comes with a final development plan and they want to do a stucco finish, and their preliminary development plan text says stone, and we say, sorry, we have to follow the text. Well, then you've treated two parties differently. And so not only do you have appeal that person may pursue, you could also have actual legal action that would result in constitutional issues and potential damages to the city. So that's why, we have the text in place, we have criteria in place so that it is a rules-based and evidence-based system and everybody's treated fairly.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to phasing plans and project phasing, because a lot of times that's based on cost, that's more at the staff level as opposed to, like, we would never be asked to approve like a phasing. Like, we had a case a few months ago that they wanted to phase it out and wanted us to approve phase one and not necessarily phase two, for instance, due to cost constraints. Mm-hmm. So how does that factor into this?
So when a planned district is to be developed in phases, that phasing plan under the Planned District Code should be established at the preliminary development plan stage. So coming back after a PDP is approved and seeking a final development plan that is phased is not compliant with what the code says.
And then this may be more a planning question, but when we're in a phase development, each phase traditionally has needed to stand on its own. Is that a matter of precedent? Is that a matter of fact that we contemplate in each development text?
In the development text, the phasing plan would be part of it. So if you have, for example, the application that was in front of you tonight, this was a second section of a phased development. So the phases are laid out in their development text. And the idea behind that being when things develop, you have a coherent, each part is a coherent unit in and of itself. So that if things go belly up and there's 10 years between phase 1 and phase 2, that you don't have 10 years of a sort of incomplete neighborhood or commercial project.
Additionally, you wouldn't necessarily have a phase development where all of the amenities, all of the open space is in a late phase.
Right. Yeah. Clubhouse is in phase 2, and it may be 20 years before the phase 1 people get to enjoy that. That is something where you would want to take special care. Stormwater management is another one where that is phased so that you are doing it in a logical sequence so that the people in phase 1, as well as the public interacting with phase 1, are enjoying a coherent, built environment and not something that is incomplete fundamentally.
Understood. Mr. Sublak.
I guess I'm going to unpack phasing a little, because we've seen and we've danced around phasing in a variety of ways and case studies. And some of the future phasing they're just allusions to it. It's lip service without necessarily any sort of formal commitment, right? Whereas I'm guessing that the case study tonight, there was a master plan to the point of there was a master plan with a master traffic study that contemplated how many potential units are potentially going in here. What's the master layout of the street network going to be? And here's the block of, initial houses, and here's the second block of houses. And of course, each time they'll have to be considered as ground up architecture again. But we've seen other cases, right? Not terribly long ago, where near as we could tell, there was street network across. Some portions were absent, some portions added in, but we weren't presented with, and they made allusions to, they spoke to, well, there's future phasing, there's future work here, but we didn't necessarily have that. Right. And then of course, even in that conversation, I'm going back to, I verbatim brought up the fact that even on a building past us, they can go to a building permit and they can we're going to build what we agreed to with planning and zoning, but we need to do it for whatever reason. Could be economics, could be logistics of you have hospital open and you need to keep it open. So you got to do this portion before you do this portion, et cetera. Right. So they go to building permit, and then there's a phasing opportunity there that manifests relative to their building permit.
So I'll address your second question first. And so if you're phasing as a result of a building permit, that can be done for a period of time, but it can't be done indefinitely, and they cannot, and if our engineers were here, they could speak probably more fully to this, but it would not, their whole site would not be cleared for occupancy when you're just using the phasing of a building permit to artificially phase a development. So certainly I want to say there's like maybe a 6-month temporary occupancy that can be renewed once for 6 months. Those sorts of things can be done to accommodate things like supply chain issues or weather or what have you, but the buck stops in a relatively short period of time. To the question about, people come with multiple phases and how do you hold them to phases 2 through 5? Short of having a development agreement that council has entered into, there's not a lot of remedy to hold them once they finish phase 1 to make them go forward and invest in phase 2 through 5. So what happens in that case is either another developer may pick up the ball, and in which case they have zoning in hand for something that they can come through with a pretty straightforward final development plan process and go off to the building department after that. Or they may have a different vision and they'll have to come back and get a new planned district put on so that they can, create their own version of a development on this land that was previously phases 2 through 5. And in evaluating that new planned district, you'd have to say, okay, how is this going to interact with phase 1 that was already built from the existing PUD? So it becomes a lot more complicated, but ultimately, short of a development agreement that has some kind of financial clawback or other penalty, there's not a way to make a developer do something down the line. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this topic? Okay. Our next one is public safety. And so by that, I'm not talking so much about things that are directly related to what is being built, traffic circulation and traffic counts and all of that. I'm talking about public safety in a more operational sense, police capacity, fire department capacity, et cetera. Here again, with the exception of criterion 5 and conditional use approval that I point out, police and fire protection are not expressly noted as criteria for decision. The idea being that policy decision of what uses should be allowed in a particular place, what density, et cetera, that's made at the legislative stage of rezoning the land in the first place. Once we get to a final development plan approval where uses are locked in, then these more public safety, sort of police capacity type of questions are not part of your criteria. And so, making sure that when addressing that type of application, we stick to the criteria is important so that whatever decision you make, it can be defended in the event of an appeal. And I noted here even for the conditional use approval, which because it has that use component does talk about, are there adequate police, is it going to be adequately served by services such as police and fire protection? We have to be careful if any decision is based upon that rationale, that the information on your record is good, reliable, competent, credible evidence. And so that may come through the report by staff, who is, our certified planners who have compiled information from their colleagues. If it is anticipated as an issue in an application, we may bring in someone from the police department who can speak directly to it, or somebody from Washington Township who can speak directly to those safety issues, so that you have credible, competent evidence and not speculation or conjecture that can be cut apart by an applicant's attorney on appeal.
Ms. Harder.
I was just thinking like last week, the school district came, and I was alluding to the door and the door of safety. If I'm talking about a material that they're bringing forward and asking about that as a safety standard, does that fit the criteria?
So it probably would not, because the material provision of the preliminary development plan's text wouldn't go into that level of detail necessarily. So that, obviously with schools is a front of mind concern operationally in terms of what they should be doing, but the hardiness of a door isn't necessarily a development plan approval.
Mr. Chinook.
But apparatus and turning radius would be something we would consider. That's separate from this,
Right.
correct?
Yeah, so turning radius, for example, on like a cul-de-sac, that goes through a technical review before it hits your packet. And staff is working with the applicant to make sure that it is sufficient for what Washington Township needs.
And then just the stress on the conditional use. We recently had an application that was a conditional use over in the perimeter area. And so a question about the conditional use with service by police department, fire department, where there were tenancy overnight in an area that historically doesn't have tenancy overnight. Would that fall into the conditional use criterion cited here?
Where, and I'm trying to think of the details.
It was the
where that was
mobility.
sort of an 8 to 5, a corridor of 8 to 5 commercial type of or businesses, and then something was coming in where people were going to be overnight.
Correct.
That could be. I could see that in that conditional use case. And ultimately, it's the police would be able to provide evidence to say, yes, we can. We send a patrol down here anyway, or whatever.
And ultimately, that could be handled by the commission asking staff to work with, because we didn't have representation from public safety or from Washington Township, directing staff as part of the.
Yeah, it could be done as a condition, delegating staff to work out those details. And because it is a condition of that conditional use approval, that condition has to be satisfied before they get zoning approval for building or occupancy permits. So that kind of goes into my next to last topic here of where we sit in this sequence of people who are dealing with development applications. Another one, planning and zoning in context, school impacts. This comes up occasionally with new residential developments, and you often get developers who will say, oh my goodness, well, this is a patio home, and people with kids don't want to live in patio homes. It's only for empty nesters or what have you. And, you should always take that with a grain of salt, because chances are they are not, maybe I shouldn't say it exactly that way. There is more to age restrict a house than just building a patio home. There are a number of fair housing requirements that they would have to comply with to keep it age restricted. So, and builders and people selling or marketing properties like that are often even unable to market things as empty nester homes because of those fair housing regulations. So they may say that in here, but take it with a grain of salt that it's no guarantee that something is a quote unquote empty nester home. That being said, comments about the effect on school enrollment, head count, et cetera. If you go through your criteria that the codified ordinances direct Planning and Zoning Commission to look at for any of these application types, effect on school enrollment is not among the criteria. And for the schools part, obviously they want to have a sense of what enrollment expectations they should have, and they do that based upon current zoning and based upon future land use plans that the city puts out. So they project it out. That is kind of baked into their cake already, no matter what you do with regard to any particular application. Now, if somebody comes in front of you and something that's in a future land use plan for commercial, and they say, well, we want to rezone this to put 200 single-family patio homes only for empty nesters here, then that may well skew those enrollment figures. But the question for you is not, does this hurt the school's enrollment? It is, given that this is not in compliance with the community plan and future land use map, does it meet the preponderance of other criteria in front of us? And I suspect that for many commission members, that is going to be a pretty high bar to clear. So if you find yourself in that situation, remember to look to, does it conform to future land use, and not so much, is it going to add heads, put behinds in seats in schools.
And again, rezoning and platting of property are legislative actions where the commission does not make that decision. We can make a recommendation.
Ultimately, you're making a recommendation, and that recommendation would all come into a record in the event of litigation, so you still want to be careful. But that one does get kicked over to council for decision.
That's always a confusing issue to me. We can't, for example, just today, I was looking at our case in the patio homes there. Hilliard School Bus was dropping off kids at those patio homes, okay?
Yeah.
Now, we can't, the builder, when they sells the house to a person, he can't say you can't have kids, or you have to be an empty nester or whatever.
Right.
So we have to assume that there are going to be kids, okay? Is that right? But we can't say this is absolutely got to be an empty nest. We can't dictate whether it's empty nester or not empty nester. He can say, I'm building something that's desirable for empty nesters, but that doesn't mean because of the price. The ones I saw over there today, I mean, there must have been 5 or 6 kids. A bus stops in front of the patio home. The kids, 5 or 6 kids, got out and went into those houses. Okay, I saw it. Okay, so, but we can't say to them, we're going to let you make the lot smaller, let's do this because there's not going to be kids allowed in there. Correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have no jurisdiction over that type of question. And so the sole considerations for you are the ones in the code which do not address kids in school at all.
So my question to you is, we have to assume that we don't know what's going to be in there when we build them, when we approve them, correct?
You should assume that there's going to be, a residential use.
A residential use.
Children or not.
There could be 4 kids in 1,200 square feet. That's not our problem.
Exactly.
And we have to make the decision based on, is it desirable for the area and and so on. Knowing there could be kids or there might not be kids.
Right. Does it conform to the community plan? Does their street network conform to the requirements of code, et cetera, et cetera?
And that goes far beyond use, family use, or anything else. It goes to the build footprint, the setbacks, everything else gets factored in there. We've had projects before where they bring a nice development plan and say, oh, there's going to be a variety of housing, there's going to be a variety of footprints, but they don't control the market. So we have these littler lots that they say, oh, well, the open space between homes is going to vary. We're asking for a 5-foot side setback, but really in all in all actuality, it's going to vary. And then the housing gets built and everybody has a 5-foot setback.
Right. Yeah. And that, to that point, in looking at that type of application, you want to think about what the consequences are going to be if people are building right up to the lines they can. And that's also one of the reasons that the neighborhood design guidelines that recently came through are going to now require that applicants show the maximum building footprint that they are going to be making available on those lots, so that you don't end up with things smushed together after having seen inspirational renderings that are more pastoral.
Yes, and for the newer commission members, that was one of the lessons learned from our board is, for years we were hearing about side setbacks and how it was going to factor out, and it's just like the development text of this older neighborhood, but when it's built, it looks totally different. Well, the development text is the same, but one didn't build the maximum and one did. And so therefore, the products look very, very different.
That's why I think when we approve, that's why I've said, we have to assume the worst, okay? And you're not really the law. I'm in that business with rentals. You're not allowed to say the amount of kids or it's people, and even in apartments, you can say, I allow 3 people in that unit. You can't say I allow 2 kids or 1 kid or whatever. So
ultimately, it's going to be a function of building code that determines what maximum occupancy.
Building what?
Building code that's going to deter residential code that's going to determine what the maximum occupancy of a particular structure is. So, all right. Hopefully I didn't confuse too many issues there. All right. Our next topic here, applications, process, and context. And we've hit upon a lot of this in our discussion tonight, which is good. But just remembering, not only for the benefit of yourselves, but for the benefit of people and the public who are coming to these meetings, that in many of the applications that this commission sees, it is one step in a multi-step process where it's going to be in front of you many times. And to that end, thinking through sort of what you need to see at concept plan stage versus at final development plan stage, and directing questions accordingly and deliberating accordingly, so that we have a clean record, and so that applicants and members of the public walk away knowing, what to expect next time this particular application is in front of the commission. So the example I gave there was landscaping at a concept plan. You may see some artist renderings because the applicant is trying to get you to picture a certain, give you a certain feel for the development. But ultimately, what's in front of you for a decision at that concept plan stage is lots and blocks, basic massing of buildings, not, how are we going to be arranging the hedges around the bases of the buildings and all of that sort of thing. That may be a perfectly germane question for final development plan approval, where we're trying to get every nit picked, but concept plan approval, they may not have a reliable answer. They probably won't. And if they give you an answer at concept plan, it may change, and justifiably so, by the time they get to a final development plan. So just bearing that in mind, we put the planning staff does a nice job of trying to orient at the beginning of their presentations with where in each development application sequence we are. But I know that planning staff is also planning to give, they're planning to give you some cheat sheets to have up on the dais with you as well, just for quick reference, so that we don't have to keep jumping back in the slides and that sort of thing. You can take them and study them at home to share them with your friends.
Additionally, the cheat sheet is the questions at the back of every application, the items to consider and are the conditions met. So that's focusing your view on each individual step. And you'll notice concept questions are completely different than preliminary, which are completely different than final. Again, tailoring down to the detail through the process. Mr. Chinook.
So the landscaping example is a good one. So when we see a concept that's got a designated area for landscape, and we're asking questions to try to understand the vision for what that green space is going to look like, you're saying that that's not applicable at that point? Because that's hard to determine. I think there's maybe a little bit of gray area in my mind about we're just trying to understand what they're suggesting, and we have to ask some of those probing questions to approve that initial plan.
There is going to be gray area because one of the criteria for concept plan is how open spaces are integrated. And, it's one thing to say how, what is this open space going to be? What's your vision for that? Citing it appropriately within the project site, but, maybe what species of tree, what's going to be here versus there. It can get to a point where it is sort of beyond the scope of the concept plan, but there is going to be gray area. If it was all black and white, then staff would just sit in their offices and, approve away or deny away, and we wouldn't need to be here.
There's also, and again, to your point, that nothing at concept plan is binding to this is exactly what open space would look like, but there's the vision and the programming. If they're contemplating open space that has no activity versus if they're contemplating open space that kind of transforms into greenway walkway. Again, we're looking at that concept plan and does it promote, and again, those questions, is it conducive with the community plan, all of those types of questions. Obviously, at the concept plan, we're looking at percentages. If they're offering 2% open space and the code requires 15% open space, we have to consider open space because the crayons don't.
Right. Yeah. And to give an example that's like, extreme for the purposes of illustration, if someone says, I'm going to vote against this concept plan application because you told me that it was going to be you were going to use biloba here, and I don't want to use that, I don't like that species that has stinky fruit. That would be not a valid consideration at the concept plan stage. But if it is, I'm going to vote against this concept plan because I'm looking at your open space, the way you've arranged it, the answers you've given to my question here about how you intend to incorporate it with the public and private realm. And it is it's atomized, it's all over the site. None of these look like very usable or engaging spaces. Then you get to something that's defensible.
Mr. Suplak.
I don't know that I have a lot to add now. Well done on the ginkgo biloba and the stinky fruit.
I saw Kim.
He lit up. He liked that one too. I guess I was gonna, relative to Jamie's question, I think there's quite a few times where, to the point of, it's not enough to say, oh, it's going to be green space and there's a big green blob on it. We do want to unpack. We do want them to unpack their vision a bit, right? I think there's just a matter in discipline. In large part, we do pretty good. Occasionally, we go past it collectively, and what color the bench is going to be. Well, you've done concept plans. None of that's really germane or critical as much as to much of the other stuff Thad touched on, right? How are these parts going to interact? Where's the public-private realm? You're planning on having an XYZ space or not? And not that it's all worked out, but directionally correct, I think, is always what we're looking for. And there is a little bit of oscillation down in, but it's usually not binding, but you're hoping we're steering the conversation effectively.
And I think it matters, and I love that you put this in context, because when we're at preliminary development plan, and we're drafting all of the language and we're creating what this is. And then we get to final and we say, hey, those awnings need to come back, or the foundations, hey, you're encroaching, there's not enough walkway. We've already done the Duplo blocks. We've already placed the buildings. And so understanding what the next step is and what is incorporated in that helps us to understand what we need to be paying attention to in this particular phase.
Right. Yeah.
And there is that gray area where we're really trying to understand each of the applications in context, but understanding when we deep dive for the, hey, I just want to catch the vision and then come back up to the 30,000 foot overview at concept plan, or where we really need to be paying attention to the foundations in preliminary, let's say, to understand that, once we've gone to the final, then, well, that's the rear view mirror now.
Yeah.
Mr. Supelak,
Yeah,
something to
Mr.
add?
Way's waiting too. I was just going to add, I think it's self-awareness, right? When you're going in for those details, are you self-aware that it's too early for this, but I want to sort of, get them talking about X, Y, or Z. I think that's the important part.
So again, I don't know why we were going on and on about this, but it's not about landscaping at the concept stage. It's about site massing. And so if you think about site massing as just architecture on a site, that's half of it. The other half is the void that's left by not having a building there. So I think what we need to look at is the overall site and how it's organized and how massing works.
Right.
And within that, there's a landscape component, right? But it's not getting into landscape.
Thank you, Mr. Way.
I'm not trying to harp on the commission about these things, but I think that, when the commission keeps its conversation focused on sort of the task at hand and is neither too early on questions nor too late on questions, then, members of the public don't leave thinking, oh my God, why didn't Rebecca ask about what color the benches were going to be? Well, the more that we all collectively stay inside those boxes, I think the easier it is for the applicants and for the public to understand kind of, okay, well, Rebecca didn't ask about what color the benches are going to be because it's going to be back in 4 months at final development plan. And then that's when we're going to hammer out these details.
And the same goes for, why did I ask about the color of the benches, but I totally ignored the landscape plan. I totally ignored these other detail items. Well, because we weren't at the Lego blocks yet. We were still in Duplo land, or we were still in crayon land.
Yeah. So that's kind of, this first set of bullets is the too early. Second set of bullets is the too late. And the chair, addressed that. We've had this, I think it's been long enough that no one, or at least that most of the current members weren't on the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we've had it come up where, why are you showing these driveways as asphalt driveways? We want to see concrete driveways. Well, it's final development plan, and in the development text that was approved, it allows either one, and we're going to go with blacktop. I know that, you catch that frequently.
You got to be on top of that. And they say, we already spent the money. One time we had a guy, the blacktop guy came in. Were you here then?
I don't
Said he was going to not bid to our city. He was because we were against blacktop driveways, and it came in the final development because we were told, don't worry about that. And it came in, and we made him change them to concrete driveways, and he said it wasn't fair and all that kind of stuff.
Or the reassurance that, we expect to do concrete. We're just hedging in case concrete goes times 10. If it's an or in the development text, it's an or in application.
Right.
Well, I kind of smiled today when I was looking at this plan. They say the choices they had were brick, stone, and cement siding. Guess what one they're going to use? Okay. So we've always got to, I think we need to mention that sometime early on.
That's right. It's being too late is no good either. So, and Ms. Call is exactly right that if it's an or in the development text, it's going to be an or in what they do. And chances are it's going to be the most cost-effective option that is available to them. Now, if the commission is wanting to hold the line on something, we're going to say brick
or stone, and we're not going to allow concrete siding, or, we're going to say driveways have to be, concrete or pavers, whatever, and we're not going to allow blacktop, that's fine. And if the cost of those things goes up times 10, then their recourse is to come and seek an amendment to that development text and see if they can justify it under the criteria that are available in that process.
That's why I think we should do it early, because they come back and they say, we never dreamed that you'd expect us to do brick or concrete or whatever. And it's not budget for that. So I think we can at least say this is what we're looking for. And that's fair to them too. Then they have an idea when they're with their architects. I think that your massing thing is important too, because they, oh my God, you're making me move a building. I think that in that early plan, we need to know where the buildings are. And
Now, Mr. Boggs, we've also had the opportunity where the commission does lose the opportunity if the or is there in the development text, then the or is there in application. But if the applicant's coming forward with something else, we can't necessarily require, if they already have a development text that's approved, then it's approved and they could go and carry on with the next step, whatever that step that may be. But if they're back for something else, there's the opportunity for the commission to ask if they would be willing. We've had that opportunity a couple of times to make modifications. It's not a requirement. We can't necessarily make it a requirement, but we've had a couple of opportunities there. Can you talk through when we would have that opportunity and when we would not?
Well, the key point there is the applicants agreeing to do it as that sort of push-pull in trying to get their, approval for the final development plan or amended final development plan, I think might be where this could come up. But by agreeing to do something like that, then the appellant or the applicant is waiving their ability to appeal it. So that is something that the commission can entertain. What the commission cannot do is say, well, this meets your code, but we're not going to let you do the other thing. Yeah.
Mr. Suplak, did you have an item?
And then the last point here, we get to very fine-pointed discussions here, final engineering on stormwater management, maybe the specs on lighting, light trespass, building security, fire rating, et cetera. Those things shouldn't even say it, almost. Those things then are taken care of at the building permit, final stage after this. Many of them are governed by their own set of codes, administered by, state certified building officials. And so just, knowing that even where there are certain loose ends, those will or should get tied up down the line.
Now, just one clarification. So lighting, when we're talking about lighting trespass, that sort of thing, but when we're talking lighting fixtures,
right,
types
the
of
appearance,
designs, that still falls to us as part of the planning process.
Right. So there is a lighting code that will look at the foot candles and lumens and all of that stuff to make sure that it is not trespassing onto other properties. But whether you're doing a pendant or light fixtures, some other light fixture, that's more in your purview.
I think one thing we shouldn't be shy about, and we've done for years, is that let's say that we always say, they say this is code. We have the right to do this, but it's negotiable. If it's a 100-foot setback and they want to move it to 75-foot setback, we say, okay, fine, but you have to put brick driveways in, or you have to do this or that, because we can. That's negotiable, correct? We can ask them to exceed code if we give them something else, right?
Well, so I think what you're talking about there is somebody coming with a planned development, like a PUD, right? They're coming, they want to create a new PUD.
Right, exactly.
So I wouldn't phrase it as we're asking you to exceed code, because they're the ones asking for a PUD because they want to do something that,
They want a special
R2
set of
doesn't
rules.
allow.
That's right. They don't want.
And so whether it meets R2 code or not is really not relevant. They're the ones as applicants asking for a special zoning text to be developed for their land. And so, yeah, you can negotiate that. I wouldn't phrase it though as meets code or doesn't meet
No,
code.
right, exactly. But the other thing, my gripe, as I said earlier, is that I think when we approve these PUDs, we should limit the choices because the choice they're going to take is the cheapest choice. So when they say brick, stone, or cement siding, those buildings are going to be cement siding. Okay, so I think that it's futile to say, oh, they're saying, well, it could be brick or it's going to be stone. It's not going to be unless we don't give them the choice in the PUD. Right.
And it may be warranted when we do some of our case studies in the future to look at PUD language and see if there are items that aren't contemplated in the PUD that are realized in a development, because the PUD text is pretty verbose, and we look back all the way to Muirfield PUD and all of the language in it, but we're not getting hundreds of acres in a PUD now. We're getting very small PUDs because of the infill development. So understanding where those holes may be so that when we're looking at any future PUDs, we can contemplate them as a whole.
And that is continuing a long Dublin tradition, because if you go back to like the Muirfield PUD, it's pretty sparse. And then as time goes on, everybody gets a little bit savvier about how these things work in practice, to where we have very detailed texts, not perfect, but often very detailed texts in our newer PUDs.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So then that's a good segue to my last slide.
Which I failed miserably at, number one. I failed miserably at the sequence today, so this is a good practical application.
This will give me a chance to pick on the chair. No. To the point of my comment to Mr. Fishman about, I wouldn't necessarily characterize insisting on a greater setback in a PUD application as meeting or not meeting quote unquote code.
Right, right.
We have to be careful, because your words are the ultimate record that a court would be looking at, to be very thoughtful about words used and the sequence that we use to get there. So, we have presentations from staff and from the applicant. We have questions to staff and to the applicant. We have public comment. That's all an information gathering phase, is how I would characterize it. And then turn to deliberation among yourselves, acting as a body to hash out the issues that you've heard about from these two podiums. And then lastly, making your decision. And the reason that we do it, and the reason we do it in that order, is because we don't want somebody to be able to come back and say, well, the chair said from the very beginning, she had it in for us. She had it in for us, was making comments after the staff presentation, and I didn't even get up there and have a chance to speak before she'd made up her mind. So that's why, questions rather than comments are solicited after staff presentation and after applicant presentation. And likewise with public comment, because you do want to have that information from the public to inform the decision, because oftentimes, they're the people who live in the area, and so they know what those local conditions are going to be. Now, whether those are always sound from an evidentiary basis, they aren't always. That's a fact. Every statement that an applicant makes isn't always very sound from an evidentiary basis either. And that goes to the next bullet. I pulled this from a transcript of a case that was appealed several years ago. And this was actually, I do know that no one on the commission now was on the commission then. Even Mr. Fishman. This was one of his brief sabbaticals away from the commission a few years ago. And there was a public comment. The application was about a hotel, an extended stay hotel to be specific. And there was a member of the public who got up and said, referred to this as the place where it was being proposed. This is a high crime area. I am worried about crime as a result of this extended stay hotel use. And a few things along those lines. Well, there was no foundation laid for her to have any opinion on what is or is not a high crime area. You know, what kind of crime, high as compared to what, et cetera. But then a member of the commission picked up on that and essentially adopted that premise as his own in his comments about the application. And so that's something that we have to be careful about.
That wasn't me.
I said, you were not on the commission at this time. This was one of your vacations. And, you know, it was picked up by a member of Planning and Zoning Commission, but from an evidentiary basis, it was problematic, would have been problematic if the appeal had gone all the way. Now, it went far enough that we ordered a transcript, but for other reasons, it ended up being dismissed. But if I were the applicant's attorney in that case, I would have hammered on reliance on this type of statement. And so just being cognizant of that, and I know it's hard. I don't, you know, no one likes to get up in front of a room and say, well, you know, that statement was not a valid expert opinion. And no one really wants to get up and cross-examine somebody on their credentials to offer an opinion about something like that. But just knowing that when an opinion is offered, whether from public comment or from the applicant, to take that with a grain of salt. And there may be times when we need to peel that onion back a little further and see if there really is expertise there or not. Because if the applicant had gotten up and said, well, no, this is a low crime area, take my word for it, he didn't have any better basis to make that statement than the member of the public had to make her statement. So just being aware of that and not necessarily adopting comments from applicants or from public comments as your own.
If I might go back to the first one on this particular slide, I do think there's a difference. And when we're talking question, that information gathering period, there's one side to add some context to your question. You know, I'm seeing this on the screen, I'm not understanding, you know, can you help me understand? I think there's something different. So for instance, we had an application this evening, and I asked the question about the overall site with how much open space there would be. It would have been different, and please provide clarity, had I said, you know, because I've been through some neighborhoods where it looks terrible because, or I think it won't look very good, where I'm conflating my question with a statement, with an opinion to, quote, make up my mind before I even had a chance to hear the applicant. So being clear in sometimes we need some context. We need some, you know, Kim occasionally will say, hey, I'm looking right here. Can you help me understand? This looks like, but can you help me understand around this corner? That's all contextual. It's setting the stage and asking the question without stating, because I've seen, because I feel, because I've heard, you know, that conflating of the opinion with the information gathering.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction to make. It's one thing to have a sort of prefatory statement of the context from which you're asking your question versus asking it in a very leading or skewed way that betrays some ultimate opinion on the application. All right. The last couple of points here, and then I will close up shop. Sometimes because this is a sequential process for development in the city of Dublin, there's almost always going to be some kind of future application in front of a development. whether that be a waiver in the case of the Bridge Street District, whether that be an amended final development plan in the case of a PUD. So just being careful when addressing those possibilities that you don't, that the commission does not betray a prejudice against that, because they have their own criteria. They're going to be subject to their own application number and their own evidentiary information gathering process. And that's what that decision should be based upon. And then lastly, in terms of structuring your comments and structuring, your ultimate comment before a vote, it is very helpful, keeping the criteria front and center, keeping the facts that were presented to you front and center, and then putting those together in your final comments before a vote. In the presentation, I saw, you have proposed an 8-story building and a 12-story building, and our height limit is 4 stories for this building type. And so I'm going to vote to disapprove. That very, sort of fact, rule, analysis, conclusion type of structure is very helpful when taking it, from a transcript, which is ultimately what we would find ourselves in the event of a challenge. And that's why there are times, you can kind of see what way applications are going. And that's why there are times that I will sometimes circle back, or, the chair will circle back and say, and try to round up those comments. So having those front of mind, referencing criteria along with what's presented the evening of the meeting, and summing it up and explaining your position is very helpful, best practice to do that. So.
Can you do the flip side? What is not helpful?
I vote no. Like, just that is not helpful. It can be, voting no is the commission's prerogative. If there wasn't the option for a no vote on any application, then there'd be no point of us coming in here, right? But, a vote without comment is not helpful from a defense of your decision perspective. I feel like this doesn't scream Dublin to me, is not a helpful type of comment. This could really be, it needs to be punched up, is not a helpful comment. But going, and I think it'll be helpful to have the cheat sheets in addition to planning report and everything, being able to say, okay, I'm looking at criteria 1 here, and the first thing is community plan, and what you've put before us proposes a 200 single-family residential homes where our future land use map has employment center. And so I can't support this application. I'm going to vote no. That is a more helpful articulation of rationale for vote.
And then in the extreme condition, this meets all of the conditions and it meets code, but I don't like it, therefore I'm voting no.
That is an unhelpful statement. That would be like the sort of cliche of leading a book chapter or something with a quote. That is the quote that will be pulled out in the brief to lead that brief.
Yes.
So to my earlier question, this, to me, the comments reflect the information we have at hand. So if we have a concept as opposed to a final plan, our final plan comments are going to be a lot more specific as opposed to our more abstract comments that are not going to be less specific early on. So our comments reflect the information we have at hand.
Yeah, and I don't know if specific is even the word that I would use. I think that they are going to be, your comments are going to be tailored. Maybe that's a lawyer semantic distinction, but they're going to be tailored to the criteria in front of you. So talking about massing, you're just going to evaluate and talk about an issue like building massing in a different way than you would talk about, something, a landscape plan.
Ted, can I pose the question differently? Because of course, we're talking about everything you just articulated about, if and when we are voting in particular, right? The commentary of, I don't know what you said. This is not very Dublin. Right. If I vote no,
I don't think I've actually heard that one.
And this needs to be punched up a bit. But here's the thing. What is it? We've looked at applicants at early stages, conceptual more so than anything else, and it's going in a good direction. You really need to love on X, Y, and Z a bit more. We've said those things. I've said those things. Love on it in particular is my language. I feel like everybody's got some of those because, of course, during our commentary or our deliberation, those are the times. And I guess I'm trying to tease apart because and help everybody realize there is still opportunity to. We're in a conversation with an applicant on a concept. We are responding, right, and it's a moment in time relative, and they are about to set forth on, we recognize they are about to set forth on much greater work. They are going to pick at some point, I hate to say it, the color of the benches. So there is merit to saying, listen, it'd be great if the benches could be oil rubbed bronze in lieu of whatever, right? And where I'm going is I just want to give the fellow commissioners that distinction and that clarity that there can be forum and opportunity relative to this sequence to add color commentary at the point of voting.
I think it goes back to the specificity versus the tailoring. So for instance, we're at concept plan and we say, I'm generally supportive of the vision looks good. We're going to expect when you come back for preliminary development plan, a better architecture. Your inspirational images are somewhat lacking. Love on it a little bit more.
Right.
We're going to expect the open space to be more programmed. Right now you have a green blob. We're going to expect a higher level of landscape, some screening against, this adjacent use, those types of generalities that are tailored to that particular phase, that stage of the development.
Yeah.
Same at preliminary development plan. We're going to expect the color of the benches. We're going to expect, gelling the light bars dispersed in a better pattern, the sidewalk accessibility contemplated better. Those types of, we're going to expect at this next phase, but we're keeping our comments somewhat general right now for the anticipated details to come later.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's a difference between, there you are, that is really, you have looked at the concept, and I'm saying concept plan just because that's kind of our most general. You've looked at the concept plan, and then you're previewing that more is going to be expected in the preliminary development plan. Everybody should know that. You're not prejudging the preliminary development plan because you haven't seen anything yet, but you're previewing to them the expectations of where those criteria are going to lead you. And then I would bet that if we went back through the minutes, in times when you have said things, Mr. Supalak, when you have said things like love on it a little bit or zhuzh it up or whatever, those are probably in an informal review. So, in Bridge Street District, that's the pre-concept plan non-binding, you have, more of an abstract look at something. And the whole point of that exercise is to get some of those more abstract comments out and to set the applicant up ultimately for success, set the city up for success. But I bet if we went back through minutes, you weren't saying love on it a little bit at a final development plan stage or a preliminary development plan stage.
I might have, but to be fair, I might have also, right. I've been on that side. I'm perhaps one of the rare members up on this dais that has been on one of the sides, that side. So I have a sense for the work that is forthcoming. And I might have, just to be clear, I might have even said it relative to a landscape plan that is stipulated with a condition that says finalize landscape plan with staff. And I'm asking for, boy, I could really use some, vertical and vertical elements in your whatever, if you could love that direction, but it doesn't become a binding criteria at any point.
But again, I think this goes back to our earlier discussion about understanding the stage that we're currently in, and as quickly as we go down that rabbit hole to be able to pull ourselves back up. So that at the concept plan, we're not going through and talking plant species, bench placement, lighting structures, anything like that, that we're, again, not leaving the audience kind of with this, well, wait a second, they talked about that, but they didn't talk about the brick on the building. And so making sure that we're being clear also.
I have something I'm curious about. You said earlier in your presentation about the stucco versus stone. You said even though it's on the other side of town, if you approve the stucco here and won't approve stucco on the other one, you're creating a problem. Well, we've mentioned many times, we say, I know you're trying hard, but if we would approve that, we're setting a dangerous precedent. Is that the right way to phrase it, or because it's true?
Perhaps you could clarify the preface for that was the development text matches in both locations, only we made an exception for one. So if you could clarify.
Yeah. So the example was where you have development texts that are the same, but we're applying them differently.
Right.
Precedent is something that both sides are going to argue.
What?
Precedent is something that both sides are going to argue. And so where we have like for like, we need to treat them the same. But I think that I wouldn't call it precedent in a technical sense because it is not necessarily binding. But if you make let's say a decision you wouldn't typically make for one applicant, then it is going to put the commission in a place where they have to find a way to distinguish that if they don't want to make that decision for the next applicant. So I wouldn't say that you're bound by it in a strictly precedential sense, like, oh, we allowed stucco in this development, we're going to have to allow it in this next development text. But you're going to have to distinguish it. It would be, well, we allowed stucco in this development text because the neighboring development already has it, or whatever reason. But we're not going to allow it in this development text because the residences surrounding this one are all brick, and it wouldn't fit in with the character of the vicinity. So you're going to have to do more work to distinguish things when you start.
I'm just kind of jaded in that direction. Being here so long, because I've seen so many times where we allow, because the building has special windows and so on, we allow something. The next guy comes in and he said, hey, you allowed that on this one. And, I'm not going to name the developer, you might remember him. And he said, I'm going to sue if you don't let me do the same thing you let the other guy do.
And that's why it's imperative that we state the reason. We allowed stucco because the adjacent parcel was completely screened and there was no view from the street.
Right.
So when the next guy comes forward with a building that's in a field that has huge setbacks and says, hey, I want stucco, no, you don't meet the same onus, you don't meet the same criteria of why we allowed it over
I'm
here.
just saying we have to be really careful about that.
Agreed.
And I've several times said, I'm voting against this because I think it'd be a dangerous precedent. Maybe I shouldn't word it quite like that. I don't know, but I've seen it happen, and I'll tell you in private later. Yeah, you were here then, by the way. And so we can use the word precedent though when we say no, right? Can we or can't we?
You can say the word precedent, but in the technical meaning of precedent, where you are bound by a decision of
Yeah, no,
another
right.
body, it is not.
Right, okay.
Mr. Schneer.
Just you have to find a way to distinguish so they're not like for like.
Yeah, 2 points. I was going to make another one, but I'll make the second one first. On precedent, and as Thad mentioned, it's precedential when it's apples and apples, when it's like circumstances. So, which is virtually impossible, unless you have.
Well,
You know,
it gets a
two-
little blurred sometimes.
Well, but that's the subject. So our ability to distinguish on the facts between one application and another may lead us to a different conclusion,
Right.
and we don't have to worry about being bound by the first decision and its impact on a subsequent application unless that project is so similar. So I that's one observation. And the other, I'll take it back 30,000 feet. This process is paradoxical, if not schizophrenic. There's inherent subjectivity to what we do. It's built into it. However, we're supposed to be guided only by the record, the evidence that's before us. So it's human nature to whether you say it or think it, I don't like, or it would be, it's too close, whatever that means, because we have preconceived notions or we want to impose our personal likes and dislikes and opinions on how the city should be developed. And it's very difficult, and we all, I think every quasi-judicial body like this struggles with this. I've seen it firsthand at the ARB, for example, is distinguishing, we are deciding on the record, and we're not bringing our own personal extrajudicial sort of like, I know that I've been past that other project on the other side of town. Well, that other side of the project on the other side of town isn't relevant to this discussion whatsoever. I mean, whether it was a good one or a bad one, it's not germane unless it's part of the record here. And I don't know an easy way out of it, because you just constantly literally have to check yourself. And is what I'm saying based on the presentation, the application, and the public comments, or am I bringing something else into it? And if you have any words of wisdom, and personally, I would be more than happy if you weighed in and called us out on it, and said, Commissioner, that's not something appropriate or shouldn't be considered in this relevance. I think we could all use a check, because we're sort of left out there, with our own wits and our own preconceived notions that we try to keep at bay.
I think he has.
I mean,
I think that's the purpose of tonight, really is.
I have another question
And
about that, or a comment about that. Well said.
Mr. Boggs, if
Oh,
you
sorry,
could
sorry.
respond, then we'll go Mr. Fishman.
Yeah, I do try not to, I try to let you guys get to, your result without too much interference from me, unless I see a real, clear and present legal problem. So I'm a lighter touch at the commission meeting than some I've worked with. I'm a heavier hand than others I've worked with. So if I need to ratchet that up, I can.
And typically speaking, I'll watch his face because you do have a tell. And so if I see that we've stepped in something, I may call on him or I may make a statement.
It's just when the steam comes out of your ears.
But not to do all this, but about the other side of town and so on, it doesn't have to be taste. I remember a case, I think we bring this up, with McDonald's at Perimeter, okay? We were a couple of us on the board were so much against them building that lane the way they did and jamming that McDonald's on that lot. The McDonald's was supposed to be across the street. It's a long story, and they lost it to the gas station, and they took the smaller lot. And they claimed that they could serve you in 30 seconds after you did the thing. So I ate more damn hamburgers and ice cream cones because I went to several McDonald's and proved they couldn't do it, okay? And so there was one that had a short lane on the other side of town that it was a nightmare. The cars are in the street and so on. Well, anyway, so I said that. I had to be the chairman at that time, and I summarized with that I had done that. I got some laughs because I showed them how many times I've been through a McDonald's drive-through, and we voted it down. Now, council overturned it, and I don't know if you've ever been to that McDonald's. People get sideswiped there, and they're out on, is that Dale Drive? What street is that there? Perimeter? The cars are out on that street. People are trying to get around them. It's terrible, okay? But so I think we did the right thing. It wasn't a matter of taste, and they had the right to do it, okay? But we didn't let them do it. Of course, they did it because council overturned it. AC Strip said they deserve a break today, and that's how they passed it. That's the truth. I was at the council meeting. So I think sometimes when I sit here, and we all do, we see something that we know isn't going to work, or it's going to be ugly, or whatever, so just tell us how to word it correctly so you don't end up in court. And I love you to interrupt me when I say, when I'm voting or whatever, because I think that we're trying to get the best deal for the city, and that McDonald's will be there for 50 years or whatever, anything. When we do something, it's going to be there a long time. And so I think that it's important to, I think your taste thing is right, but I think that if we see something somewhere else that's not working, I think we should be able to.
Well, and that too.
I just think I want to go back to the amount of homework that staff does in preparing the agendas for us and those consideration questions, because that essentially is our script. If we think that it doesn't meet the zoning application, if it doesn't meet the vision of the community plan, if it doesn't meet the circulation or parking requirements or anything else, that's our script that we say, okay, you know what? Yes, it could be subjective, doesn't meet, but being able to articulate how it doesn't meet that particular item. Staff does an amazing job at preparing that, especially the supplemental agenda that we received that restates all of those questions that appear in the public presentation that allow the public and the applicant to see what our considerations are.
Mm-hmm. And I think Rebecca does an incredible job of summarizing before we vote. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes it pretty clear. It's made me feel more comfortable several times because she does give the clarification before we vote. We feel this way, this way. So
Mr. Supla.
I was only going to add that the questions a lot of times also give the framework for color commentary.
Agreed.
Right. Does the massing meet X? And then you can unpack. Does the, whatever the criteria is, there is the opportunity for color commentary, specifically in the deliberation, that drives that.
Agreed. Yeah. Ms. Harder.
I just had a question about, we had one example of public comment. I wanted to see if we could just hear a little bit more about that, where you have an applicant who comes in and we ask them to reach out to the neighbors, things of that sort, and to reflect back and hear about that as well too. And when they come up to how we are to interpret, and just so that I understand what you're saying earlier, is that it may not be scientific, but it's what they live, and how to decipher that in our deliberations. Thank you.
Well, yeah, there's certainly a difference between first-person observations, right? I have noticed that I have, I can hear traffic in my bedroom now. I can count, if I sit on my porch for 5 minutes, there are 100 cars that go by. That's a first-person observation. Getting into statements of opinion without having some foundation technically it doesn't have evidentiary value. It's not competent evidence. I cannot say, roundabouts are safe. I can't say roundabouts are unsafe. I am a lawyer. I am not an engineer. Whereas, Tina Waskowitz is an engineer. She's a civil engineer. She can go, she could go through her background and training and experience and validate her ability to offer opinions on that topic. So that's really, I think, the difference. First person observation versus statement of opinion. And, it's hard to make those distinctions sometimes in real time, but, and you want to respect everybody who has made the effort to come out and speak at the podium. But from an evidentiary basis, statement of opinion needs to have some foundation for it.
And then can you speak to the outside of the 200-foot noticing and that sort of thing, the engagement with the public on any particular application?
By the applicant or by the city?
By the applicant or by staff. We have some instances where staff engages. Well, staff notices, but also engages.
Right. So notices go out usually because it's required by code for a certain radius. And the reason that code requires it for a certain radius is because people within that radius can be assumed to have some interest in the application because of how it's going to affect their property due to its proximity. Asking an applicant to go and speak to their future neighbors, I think, and particularly when we're in that informal stage, is a perfectly valid exercise of what you are doing, because it's going to prevent a lot of problems down the road, or it may expose problems at an early stage rather than an end stage, right? So either way, we want to do those things on the early end. And if you hear something from an applicant or from anybody that doesn't quite pass your smell test, ask them about it. If they say, "Oh, yeah, we can get people through this drive-through without any problem," or "We can get people, we only stack 3 cars," and ask them, tell me where you've done that. Where, can you show me some numbers? Can you show me some figures? And really, you can bear down on that and test its credibility. Because ultimately, with Mr. Fishman's example, that was an issue of he didn't find the representations made about that site configuration to be credible. And, ideally, that would come through questioning and drawing that out here versus doing field work as a member. But and there's always going to be that human nature aspect, as objective as we try to be and as much as we endeavor to follow the facts and the rules where they may lead us. There's a reason why there are 7 of you and not 1. There's a reason we go through this whole exercise in itself. There's a reason why there are 9 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, and they're not all 9-0 votes, right? So people come, you are here because you have a certain set of skills or perspective that you're going to bring to it, but that all needs to be tempered by application of the code and facts. So much to my amazement, I've been up here for over 90 minutes.
So
We
I
just like you
appreciate
that
your
much.
engagement. I am happy to answer any other questions you have, but I also don't want to prattle on forever. So
Oh, we certainly appreciate the
Thank you, Thad.
refresher.
Thank you, Thad.
Very much appreciated. Does the commission have any other questions they'd like to ask Mr. Boggs at this time? All right, do we have any communications from staff?
We do not.
Thank you, Ms. Noble.
I have one question or one comment. Do you think it would be helpful, and I know staff has all kinds of sorts of stuff to do, but the whole mailbox, would it be helpful if we had like a memo at some point, understanding what, there's been several applications where the applicant has said, well, the postmaster, the U.S. Postal Service requires this or doesn't require that. And we take, we pretty much take it at face value.
Like tonight, you mean, with the,
Well, like tonight, but
Yeah.
so I'm speaking for myself, it would be helpful to know what is prescribed, what the options are, what latitude, if any, the applicant has, we have, et cetera. We can Google it, but
No, we actually would like for you to give us that direction so we can research it and give it the same information to everyone. So that's easy for us to do.
does anyone else?
Head nod, you got 4 head nods. We're good.
like the mailboxes, I thought they only came in one color.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending another Thursday night with us. Meeting adjourned.